Listen, I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you don't know who you're making your podcast for, you're gonna have a really hard time growing your show. And recently, someone left a comment on a video saying this. They are doing all of the technical research for their podcast and they wanted help figuring out the audience and the content side of things. And in today's video, we're gonna be covering exactly how to figure out who is the ideal listener or the ideal listeners for your podcast. I'm Huete, I'm a podcast producer. Here are some of the shows that I have made. I'm also the creator of the Emerging Voices Podcasting Accelerator. And if you are curious about starting a podcast, I think you will really appreciate my 10-step guide to launching your show. And you can download that in the video description below. Now, step one to figuring out who your audience is to start with a hypothesis. This means you already, in your heart of hearts, know who you think might listen to your podcast. And this can be as small as a hunch or as big as people have told you they want to hear a show from you, and that's who you're making your show for. Now, in order to clarify this hypothesis, I want you to answer the following questions. Number one, who do I think would be most excited to hear my podcast? Number two, what problem do I think they're navigating? Number three, what kind of help are they actively seeking? So you're not locking anything in yet, but these questions are starting to get at the root of what it is that your ideal listener is coming to your show for. And if you're not picking up on this already, we are creating podcasts that actually connect to people on a really deep level because they help them solve a problem that they currently have. Yesterday, I was talking to a prospective student and she was a single mom who wanted to make a podcast for other single moms, teaching them how to co-parent peacefully. And that is a problem that she knew her potential audience might have. So you're trying to answer your questions in a very similar way. What is it that your audience really struggles with that they're coming to your show for? Step two is to interview real people. This does not mean send out a survey or put a poll out. Those things can be helpful, but having real one-to-one conversations with people who fit into the archetype that you already think your listener fits into is very helpful because it basically helps you validate whether your hypothesis is correct or incorrect. As an example, I scheduled 4 or 5 30-minute calls with people when I was thinking about creating a podcast around creative resilience. And I basically just said, hey, if you are someone who has a creative idea, but you're struggling to bring it to life, I would love to schedule a 30-minute call with you. If that's you, please DM me and I'll schedule a time for us to chat. And already in my mind, I thought my ideal audience is somebody who is super clear on what they want to make, but there's just fear that's holding them back from actually creating their whatever creative idea they have. When I sat down and talked to people, I realized there was actually 2 kinds of people that were attracted to this messaging, right? There were the people who felt like, I just want a step-by-step plan to create what it is that I want to create. And then there were the people who were like, I want to see examples of other people who have who have brought their creative ideas to life, and I just want you to interview these people and I want to hear their stories. These are 2 very different kinds of audiences. So I never would have really understood that, and I never would have understood the motivation behind what they're really looking for and what they're struggling with if it was just a poll or a survey. And so sitting and having a conversation where I could ask follow-up questions and dig deeper really allowed me to validate my hypothesis. So whether it's on Instagram or your newsletter or an email list that you already belong to, I want you to put out a message inviting people to schedule a call with you if they fit into the kind of listener that you imagine listening to your show, okay? So here's a sample text that you can use. I'm looking to do market research for a podcast that I'm creating. It's about, insert your subject. If you're someone who, insert the problem that they might be dealing with or that you are going to cover on your podcast, I would love to chat with you. Please DM me so we can schedule a time to connect. So this whole step is really about validating the hypothesis that you came up with in step 1. Step 3 is asking questions that matter once you're actually on the call with these people. Now, there are 2 main kinds of questions you want to be asking. The first is demographics. So this is stuff like age, maybe gender, if that matters to you, race, what kind of work they do. And then we have psychographic questions. These are questions that get at their motivation, their values, their problems, the things that they are trying to solve in their lives, and also their lifestyle. I would argue the psychographic questions almost matter more to you than the demographic questions, because the psychographic questions are going to help you get a better sense of what kind of episodes these people want to hear and what kind of guests they want to hear from and what kind of host they would best connect with, so that you know whether the show that you're making will actually resonate with what they want to hear. So here are some of the questions from lesson 2 in the Emerging Voices Accelerator, where we go super deep in really understanding who your audience is, so that when you are making your show, you know that there will be a listener at the end of it. Okay, so write these questions down and make sure to ask them when you get on your call. Number 1, how do you usually look for help when it comes to insert problem? So for me, if I was making a podcast about creative resilience, I might say, how do you usually look for help when it comes to getting over the fear of creating? Number 2, what's something about this problem that nobody really talks about? What's something about creating that nobody really talks about? Number 3, what kinds of podcasts do you already listen to? And once they tell you, you can ask, why those? What draws you to them? Maybe they'll tell you, I love the host. Maybe they'll tell you, I find it really interesting that they interview these kinds of people. Or maybe it's that I hate interview shows and I just love hearing from this particular person about their story and their experiences. So it gives you a sense of what your listeners are into. One important note I have to make here before we go on and I jump into the other questions. When you are making your podcast and you're asking these questions, you're not necessarily making a show that just fits into the mold of what they like. Your ideal show, if you're thinking of 2 Venn diagrams, in one circle is what your audience needs, and in the other circle is what you want to talk about and what you want to explore. The podcast that you can uniquely make and that you can uniquely grow is a podcast that where that overlap is between what they're saying they need and what you're saying you're curious about. Does that make sense? I hope so, because this is a key part of it. If you're just making something that other people want, but you're not that curious about it, we're gonna know that you don't care. But if you're just making something that you care about, but you haven't validated, we're also gonna know that you don't really care about what we think. You're just making this for you. And sometimes that works. That's worked for people like Tim Ferriss, who was one of the first in the game. So he's just had enough time to craft episode after episode based on his own interests and bring an audience with him, right? So it's not to say you can't just make a show that only you care about, but if you really want to make a show that grows and that connects with a specific audience, you want to make it with them in mind, but also you want to keep your own interests in mind as well. Back to the problems. So number 4, what's been genuinely helpful to you as far as insert problem is concerned? Number 5, if I could cover one thing in my podcast that would dramatically help you, what would it be? Now, don't just check boxes as people give you these answers. You want to be asking questions like, tell me more, how come, what do you mean by that? So that you can start identifying the patterns and the commonalities and the emotions that come up for people in these answers. So the first level answer is usually not that helpful. It might not give you the kind of depth that you're looking for. Usually it doesn't. But after you ask these same questions to a few different people, you're gonna start identifying patterns. Which leads us to step 4, building your listener profiles. Once you've done your interviews and identified some patterns, you can usually distill the information that you've gotten into 2 distinct profiles. The first is what we call a primary listener. This is someone who buys into your perspective or already believes what you believe or thinks that the problem is the same thing that you think is the problem, right? So for me, for example, I know that in order to actually bring your creative ideas to life, you have to build your creative resilience. So if that term resonates with them, if they're excited to learn more, I know that this is my primary listener. On the other hand, you can have a secondary listener. This is someone who's on the edge of the community that you're building. So this is someone who might be a little skeptical, someone who isn't really that committed to solving this problem yet, someone who is curious but has one foot in, one foot out. Now, these are super helpful because we know that your secondary listener, if the problem or the solution is framed in the correct way, they might lean in. And generally, I recommend people make a podcast first for their primary listener. When you're starting out, it's just easiest to make something for the person that you know is aligned with how you're already thinking. Because when you're starting, there are enough hurdles that you don't need to add complexity to what you're doing. Once you get good though, you want to start making your podcast for your secondary listener. These are the people who need you to frame the episode, the problem that you're solving in a more interesting way. Or maybe they need you to be more research backed, or maybe they need you to answer the questions before they ask them, right? So you want to be super sharp when you are trying to capture the attention of your secondary listener. That's a far harder thing to do than to capture the attention of your primary listener. And so when we start with our primary listener. We try to make sure that what we're creating lines up with what they need and what we know we're curious about exploring. And then over time, we can try and slowly bring in our secondary listener as well. Now, as a quick example, one of my students is making a podcast about Black women in tech, and she wanted to make her show for early stage professionals to help them navigate the corporate world and to figure out how to thrive in that game without burning out. Now, she knows that her primary listener is this early stage professional who listens to podcasts on her commute, but she also knows that there's a secondary listener. These might be the bosses of the primary listener, or these might be later stage professionals who are also curious about these things. But because my student is in her first season, she's just focusing on her primary listener. So with that clarity, she knows exactly how to title her episodes, what stories she needs to center, and even what platforms she should prioritize doing her podcast promotion on, because she did interviews with her potential listeners. So those are the 4 steps to figuring out who your ideal listeners are. Now, if you have heard all this and you're thinking, cool, I'm ready to go, one important note I want to leave you with is that this is a super iterative process. So as you make your podcast, as you put episodes out, continue to get to know your audience better, episode over episode, because you are going to evolve, your show is going to evolve, and so is your audience. So you want to stay really connected to them so that you guys can grow together. All right. Now, if you have watched all this and you're like, okay, I want to learn more, you'll really appreciate the 10-step guide to launching your podcast. It breaks down the strategy, production, and community building that we teach in the Emerging Voices Podcasting Accelerator, and it will allow you to think more strategically about your podcast so that you can make a show that is A, uniquely your own, but B, connects to a very specific audience. Now, I want to hear from you. What's your hypothesis? Who do you think your ideal listener is? And what's the show that you're making? I'll talk to you in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.